2022 China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Dialogue. Hong Kong's former Chief Secretary for Administration, John Lee Gai-chiu, has been elected as the Chief Executive Designate for the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. Who is John Lee? What challenges does he face? And what changes does he plan to bring to Hong Kong? To find out, I'm joined today by Victor Gao-Chikai, Chair Professor at Suzhou University, Lawrence Ma, Barrister and Chairman of the Hong Kong Legal Exchange Foundation, and John Ross, Senior Fellow at the Chung-Yang Institute for Financial Studies of Renmin University of China. That's our topic. I'm Xu Qinduo. Okay, welcome to the show, gentlemen. Lawrence, I will start with you. You have cast your vote. You have experience in the voting process. Tell us how it is like and your impression of the overall election.
I actually went to vote very early. I went there about before 9, and then in the Hong Kong Convention and Exhibition Center, it has so many manpower guiding you through each and every step. There has been labels and signs on the ground showing you where to go, how to walk, and when you go past the checking point, you got to have a card, and then there's a ID. You scan your QR code, and then you go in there, and the John Lee's team was there, and then I greet them, and they welcome us, and then I went in to vote at 9 a.m. The door opens, and then there are so many official staff. They're on 40, 50 tables. You just have to go into the table and sit on next to the table, and then they will give you a ballot paper. The entire and then once you get the ballot paper, you go into the voting booth and then stamp your vote and then fold it and give it put it inside a metal box. The whole process takes about, I think, less than 5 minutes. And it's very smooth and hasn't got any hiccups, and it finishes very early today.
So that's very smooth and orderly.
Yes.
Nice to hear that. Victor, I know that if you look at this election against a big picture, obviously this is an important step to implement this principle of like a patriots governing Hong Kong. So how big a thing, how important a step is it in realizing our long-term stability, security, and prosperity of Hong Kong?
Absolutely. My personal reading is that the vote today for the next chief executive in Hong Kong really demonstrates democracy with Hong Kong characteristics under the overall framework of one country, two systems. And the whole process also indicates that democracy is life in Hong Kong, stability is very much treasured, and there is commitment to maintain the one country, two system and protect democratic rights of all kinds for the people of Hong Kong on the one hand, and also to make sure that the election of the chief executive should be an orderly process rather than an occasion for great chaos in Hong Kong, and which will also lay the foundation of the next term of the chief executive in Hong Kong, who will really strive hard to maintain greater stability in Hong Kong and enable Hong Kong's economy to develop and thrive together with China itself, as well as with the rest of the world. So this gives a lot of confidence to the people in Hong Kong, and also it dispels all kinds of false accusations and speculations about the realities in Hong Kong. I think one country, two system and democracy with Hong Kong characteristics are truly crossing a major milestone today.
Mm-hmm. Well, John Ross, obviously there is also criticism from the West, in terms of the election. But as Victor said, the Hong Kong style democracy and the practice is obviously necessary for Hong Kong and Hong Kong's environment and this one country, two system. The line of the 50 years commitment of there.
Yeah, well, I think that the criticism from the West is ridiculous. I mean, Britain ruled Hong Kong for more than 150 years, and there was never election of the equivalent of the chief executive, the governor general, in any form whatever. So it's a bit funny when people then make criticisms of various methods of election of the present chief executive when they never had any elections at all. More important than that, or more symptomatic even than that, there were no protests about it. When did we hear the great lectures from the United States about the intolerable activities of the British in Hong Kong by having imposing a government in which there were no elections at all? So I think we can pay no attention to these at all. They're absolutely farcical. What was also the case is, of course, that during the period of disturbances, they supported things which were completely intolerable. I mean, you had in very serious riots in Hong Kong use of Molotov cocktails, and I actually think that the Hong Kong police during this acted with great restraint. If you throw a Molotov cocktail at an American police officer, expect to be dead. And there was no deaths in this. There were some disturbances, of course. So I think the whole, but compared to what happened in the United States, this was nothing. So I think that the whole attack which has been made on the West is hypocrisy of absolutely the first rank.
Mm-hmm. Well, Lawrence, back to you here. Obviously, John Lee, the future chief executive of Hong Kong, he earned the top job, elected to the top job. But his background as a police, previously a frontline police officer, and then the security minister, and then this chief secretary, the second top job in Hong Kong. Given his background, how that will facilitated his handling of the challenges or achieving his priorities or affecting his performance as the leader of Hong Kong?
The very noticeable motto of his election is achieving goal being the aim. Achieving goal being the aim. Now that speaks a lot, because Hong Kong's problem in administrations has been a lot of discussions, but there is no decision. There's indecision, and where there is a decision, there is no implementation. So it boils down to there are a lot of good policies, but it cannot touch down to the ground. So execution is the key. Well, you can have a lot of good think tanks, but when it comes down to execution, implementation, initially it was blocked by the Legislative Council, who was stacked by the opposition parties and who were funded by the US and the UK and some Western powers. And they're subservient to those Western powers. Their paramount interest is not Hong Kong. So I mean, we have this Legislative Council problem, and it has now been resolved. And the next problem to tackle is the administration, the executive, being the important branch of the government. So the executive would have to, John Lee would have to tackle his own staff in the government to make sure they do their work. Because Hong Kong and civil servants, they have security of tenure, which means that you cannot fire them unless you can discipline them. You can dismiss them, but they're very rare, very hard. So how do you get these people you cannot dismiss to work properly and industriously and diligently? That's most important. That's implementation and execution. I think John Lee has actually pointed the most important problem in Hong Kong, so that he would have a very strong policy and action against those indecisions and inactions. Yes.
Mm-hmm. We'll speak of that, Victor, obviously with a strong mandate over landslide victory there. So John Lee also mentioned about, in his first 100 days in office, will focus on raising this, speed, efficiency, and quantity in housing development. And I think, for people who follow Hong Kong's development, they understand that, one of the tricky issues is really about the housing, the shortage, supply shortage of housing in particular. So how is, he's in a better position, let's say, than previous chief executives in dealing with this problem?
Well, first of all, let us wish Mr. John Lee all the best in his first 100 days, as well as throughout his tenure of office as the chief executive of Hong Kong. Secondly, housing market issue is truly one of the major issues facing Hong Kong. Why? Because property market is one of the most important pillar industries in Hong Kong. But truly, during the British Hong Kong rule period, as well as after 1997, for many years and more than 2 decades, the property market in Hong Kong was very much skewed towards protecting the property tycoons, the property developers, etc. There was not a very conscientious effort in promoting housing for the people in the lower echelons of the society as a whole, meaning those who earn less money, who cannot afford the property or houses or apartments as they are in the market, are excluded from the housing market, and they live in very crowded, sometimes very inconvenient or even inhumane living conditions. I think this is one thing that Hong Kong really need to devote all its resources to get over with. I think for Hong Kong people to have decent spaces of living is a must, is a minimum threshold for democracy of Hong Kong characteristics in Hong Kong. Now, how to balance, on the one hand, to promote housing on the one hand, but also to make sure that the property market as a whole does not suffer wild fluctuations, and property developers do not fear for the future of the property market in Hong Kong as a whole, and will still be very much committed in staying in Hong Kong, devoting their resources and capital to developing all kinds of houses and apartments for the broad masses of people. This is a challenge, and I think Mr. Lee is well positioned, and he has all the qualifications to do that. First, he needs to have a very deep, in-depth understanding of the housing situation in Hong Kong. He needs to make a determination and commitment that no social strata should be excluded from the housing market, and everyone in Hong Kong needs to have a minimum decent living space requirement. And then he needs to mobilize all the industries, all the property tycoons, funds from all avenues to make sure that the property developments in Hong Kong will be done on a very sustainable basis, and to make sure that those with lower income should still have decent amounts of living spaces in the future.
Well, John, picking up on what Victor has said, whatever system, whatever democracy, style of democracy you have in your society, I mean, ultimately, you need to serve the society, the people, in particular, the people with disadvantages. Like housing is one of the issue, right?
Yes, certainly. I mean, I've got a slightly different angle, obviously, from the other speakers here, because I'm not Chinese, although I've been to Hong Kong quite a number of times, both privately, and I was there at a conference with the previous chief executive, Carrie Lam. That was the last time I was in Hong Kong. So I don't get involved in the constitutional matters other than making observations about the West, because I'm not a Chinese citizen, so I haven't got any right to be involved in these matters. But I do notice the social situation. Obviously, the one country, two systems is the foundation of what has to be done, and I wouldn't suggest for a moment, that that should be altered. But let's look what it means in real terms. It means it's a socialist system in mainland China, and there's a capitalist system in Hong Kong. Well, okay, there's no proposal to change this. This is set in place for 50 years. But within the framework of the capitalist system in Hong Kong, you can have various different varieties of capitalism. Obviously, in mainland China, the government is able to take very strong measures to protect the population. It has huge housing programs. It has poverty alleviation programs, and so on. Basically, as outlined by President Xi Jinping, with common prosperity, the aim is that from China's development, all strata of the population must grow. And the government has rather strong measures which it can take and does take in order to ensure this is the case. There is a disadvantage in Hong Kong, which is that it's a capitalist system, and that capitalist system doesn't generate necessarily equality and development. And if I can make an observation purely from a social point of view, as a political one, I think that I agree with what Victor said. I think that insufficient measures were taken in the period after 1997 of the to ensure that all sections of the population in Hong Kong benefited from the situation rather than just property tycoons, etc. And I think this was probably a cause of some of the discontent. So if the new chief executive, John Lee, is going to take measures without overturning the capitalist basis of Hong Kong, because there are many different types of capitalism. You have Swedish style capitalism, which is highly egalitarian. You can have extremely unequal capitalism as in the United States. If he's going to take measures to ensure that all the population of Hong Kong benefits from this situation, then I think that is likely to enhance the situation of stability within Hong Kong. And purely personally, this would seem to me absolutely correct thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Lawrence, related to this housing issue or the livelihoods of Hong Kong people, John Lee also during his campaign talked about building a caring society, in particular for the young people. And of course, the housing is a very dear topic to the young people. When they say graduate from university, find a job, you need to get married, you need to have your own house. That's one of the priorities in your life career development. So there's a caring society for young people. Why is it so important to John Lee?
Well, because as you can see that back in the 2019 and back in 2014, 2019 there being the Black Clap riot, and then the 2014 occupying Central, many of the people who have been mobilized to come out to protest, showing disgruntledness are the young people. So it gives an impression that the young people were those in the need. But of course, I mean, you have to. Housing problem is the problem, yes, because many young people, because the housing prices is so high, they cannot get a place, they cannot afford to buy a place to live. That is a problem, and there are so many lands in our rural areas, in the new territories, and in islands too, which you can build public housings on it, and that has been the plan. But the problem is you first got to tackle the rural lands first, because the rural lands have so many different type of usages. You got to put them together. That's the first thing. The second thing is to build public housing. In Hong Kong, it takes 10 years to build a public housing estate. The waiting time to build a public the waiting time to get onto one of the public housing unit in Hong Kong is now 10 years almost. So I mean, people cannot really buy a house, and it really gives them a sense of instability in their mind. And when it's being stirred up by Western powers on this war against China, then these young people are stirred up pretty easily to fight against the government, to topple the government, hopefully, in their mind. So I mean, it's an intertwined issue, a matter that has its root. So yeah, when you talk about youth problem, it's not just youth problem per se. It is actually a lot of socio-economic problem entangled together to highlight it or be seen in happening to our younger people. So I mean, to resolve the youth problem, you got to resolve other problem in order to alleviate the youth problem.
Mm-hmm. Well, Victor, speak of that. Obviously, this young people, when we talk about this Occupy Central in the 1990s and the 2019 riot, obviously it's a social issue, economic issue, political issue, and also security issue. That's also why, about 2 years ago, Hong Kong introduced this national security law, and now we see with the election of John Lee a strong unity, in Hong Kong to deal with that issue. From a stability and security point of view, and how has Hong Kong developed over the past 2 years, and in particular today? I mean, stability, security is a foundation for whatever development, economically, socially.
Well, I think several points allow me to mention. One is that to maintain the capitalist system for Hong Kong under the one country, two system is absolutely necessary and is actually indispensable for the continued success of Hong Kong. Secondly, capitalism really, as the other panelists mentioned, has different manifestations and shapes and forms and colors. So Hong Kong needs to really identify a particular type of capitalism which can suit its circumstances the best. Now, the third point is that before 1997, the British Hong Kong government is very much laissez-faire. It controlled several things and then let the market do its job. And as a result, tycoons developed very well in Hong Kong. They were the property tycoons, for example, but then they focused on making money, sometimes more for themselves than for the shareholders or for society at large. Now, I think this is exactly one area where the Hong Kong government should step in. Why? They need to make sure that the capitalist system will continue, but on the other hand, the development of houses, apartment buildings, etc., need to give consideration to the housing needs of people in the lower echelons or strata of the society, meaning those people who are priced out of the market, who either have to wait for, as mentioned, 10 years or even longer, or by the end of their life, they cannot move into a decent apartment. This destroys the expectation for a better tomorrow in Hong Kong. So I think how to strike the balance is really the key.
Well, John Ross, obviously, economy is the key for any society. So it's for Hong Kong here to develop the economy, to create jobs, and to create more opportunities for young people, for the society at large. And Hong Kong has been applying to join this RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. This is the largest trading group here that includes the 10 ASEAN countries, includes China, Korea, Japan, Australia, and also New Zealand. So this is probably will create a lot of opportunity for Hong Kong. And also Hong Kong is part of this Great Bay Area, as Victor has mentioned, about, with Guangzhou, with Macau. The Bay Area is one, our top development area, focusing on the innovation and high-end manufacturing. So the future seems to be bright.
Oh, yes, certainly. I mean, that was why all the instability of the last couple of years, or a couple of years ago, was very damaging. Hong Kong's got very many advantages because, basically, considered from an economic point of view, it's an offshore entry into the Chinese market. And it therefore has the advantages both of being related to the Western capitalist countries and to China. It's the obvious logical place in order for Western companies to get into the Chinese market and for Chinese companies to expand internationally. I also think it can gain from certain immediate elements of the situation. Although, for example, I'm a great supporter in general of China's economic policy, I think it made a mistake in allowing a number of its most important companies to become listed on the New York Stock Exchange, for example. I don't think that was no country should allow its most important companies to be listed outside, and that's been recognized, and some of them are relocating to Hong Kong. I noticed, for example, Alibaba has restarted a listing inside of Hong Kong. So there's both strategic advantages for Hong Kong and some immediate elements in the situation. Also, what it should look at, Hong Kong's standard of living, the income of the Hong Kong population is higher than average for China. And what it should be looking to is for the whole of China to be going forward and for Hong Kong to play a leading role in this. There's a phrase with regards to the Southeast Asia as a whole, which is called the flying geese formation, which is the countries flying a V shape, developing a V shape with some at the head, and Hong Kong can play that role. That's why all this disruption of the last period and concentration on basically political provocations was greatly damaging. So I hope under the new executive, Hong Kong will return to taking advantage of its economic advantages, and that will also then provide the base to deal with the various social problems that Victor's outlined most eloquently and which can be seen from outside.
Yeah, now here's a brief, almost like a yes or no question to all of you, the three guests here. I'll start with Lawrence, with a strong mandate now in the hands of John Lee and his team here. And also we see the strong unity with the election, high approval rate of Hong Kong people. Are you confident of Hong Kong's future, economically, socially, and in all aspects, actually?
Well, across my heart, I think Hong Kong will turn a new page. Definitely, there will be a new page. We will shine as one of the most important and most prosperous international city in the world. We will be able to get rid of all these economic, political clouds that has been clouding us for over the past 10 or 15 years. We will be able to sweep that away with the new national security law and with this new patriots ruling Hong Kong, with the new chief executive, with the new legislative council. We will be able to do a lot for Hong Kong. We have to catch up in the next 5 years. For just like when China was developing, we will have to catch up in the coming 5 years to a development. I would expect, a very serious double-digit growth.
Victor, a new chapter for Hong Kong.
Absolutely, a new chapter, and I believe by 2049, Hong Kong will be one of the most successful cities in China as a whole. Will be a major connection point between China as a whole and the rest of the world. And then Hong Kong will really give full play to all the advantages. For example, the common law system, the Hong Kong dollar, which is pegged to the US dollar, and the wide use of English, and also the fact that Hong Kong people with Hong Kong SAR passports have a visa-free exemption with more than 150 countries. And this is truly a big advantage to those people in China's mainland holding PRC passport, because even as of today, using PRC passport to travel internationally is still more inconvenient than Hong Kong residents using Hong Kong SAR passport. So I hope the people in Hong Kong will really look very closely as to what advantages they have, give full play to the advantages, and make sure that Hong Kong's tomorrow will be brighter than any day in its history.
John, your confidence?
Well, I'm by nature a very cautious person, so I don't like to have projections which haven't yet been developed. But the most fundamental thing is that Hong Kong, to stop all this nonsense, which was really behind some of the rioting, but Hong Kong separatism, pretending it's not part of China, etc., etc. The precondition is that Hong Kong sees itself as a fundamental, important lead-in city within China, and it has distinct advantages because it's offshore base, and also because of the character of the two systems, and it's open door to China. Therefore, provided it takes advantages of these benefits, then it will go forward very strongly. Of that, I'm absolutely certain. So I very much hope that the new executive, which I see has put an end to this rather disturbed period, which happened in the last period, by focusing on these key things and solving some of the social problems, will lead to an important advance for Hong Kong, because all the objective conditions exist for it. It's just that, unfortunately, at least some people within Hong Kong attempted to mess it up. So I hope Hong Kong has now returned to a path of development which is entirely possible for it, and which Victor and Lawrence explained really is what is the basis for it. So I'm hopeful, but I'm a cautious person.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Victor and Lawrence. With that, we come to the end of today's show. Many thanks again to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app or on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.